that we've had a day, we started off speaking about what this place is, this Ubuntu, this house, this space for coming together to show that together we are better, that we are, because we are each other, connected to each other. How do you like the way I just blew that very, very important African expression? But the point being that because I am, you are.
Yes.
There we go.
Therefore.
You are, therefore I am.
Yes.
Thank you. And this is very, very critical. And this is very important. And this is how Crossing Borders walks through the world every single day. And I've had the privilege to be walking in tangent and with them over the last few months. And it's made me very, very proud and made me very happy. And I am ecstatic to be here right now. You're saying, but Lori, why are you going on and on about all this? Well, actually, because you thought I was digressing. But it brings us to this whole point, and this is to our ambassador from South Africa to Denmark. It brings us to our patron of Crossing Borders. And you all know who Zindzisma Mandela is. You tried to take 5,000 selfies with her out there. And we are aware of her parentage, the struggles of her family, the struggles that she experienced. And my point is that as on International Women's Day, it is a wonderful tribute to have her here, and that we wanted to give a tribute to her mother for all that she represented and often may even get overshadowed by her father. And this is something that women as people, we need to also address, that often this is what happens. And the fight, the work, the struggle, the heart that your mother put into life, and how you were impacted by that, as I believe many of us are, impacted by the way we are raised and the struggles and the experiences that we have as children growing up, that helps to form who we become as adults. And so I loved that you talked about parentage and how raising your kids to be more equal is important. And now I'm going to give the mic to the person you've been probably waiting for, more than me anyway. And I would like to have you come to the stage. Her Excellency. Did you know what it was? You didn't know what it was? I like that. See, I would have been like this. I'm ready. So, Madam Ambassador, Her Excellency Zindzisma. That's so great. Thank you, and welcome back to Denmark. So great. Looking forward.
Very
good? Okay.
About the SDG soccer ball, when are you? I think you once presented at Africa Innovation Network.
Oh, yeah.
Fleming Sorensen.
Yes, yes.
Because I must confess, I already had one ball. I took it to my 6-year-old son, and I was trying to explain to him about the 17 SDGs, and he said, "No, Mommy, that's not true." And I said, "What?" He says, "Not even Ronaldo or Messi can score 17 goals in a game." So now, as a woman, I'm very proud to have SDG balls. Mr. Garbadiano, Mariano Davis, and all the broader family of Crossing Borders. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I know there are a few little kiddies around, young lions, Viva up to you. I am humbled by this gesture to so boldly honor my mother, whose role is often overlooked when my father is revered and celebrated the world over. My mother's love for her people was deep and unconditional. Always the first to arrive in a crisis situation on the ground without media or police protection. Her love knew no borders and extended from Cape to Cairo, even embracing the diaspora. During the violent clashes that occurred between foreign nationals and South Africans, she would often be the first to arrive, standing between the warring factions, determined not to leave until she had brought about calm, and only leave when she had ensured that people under attack left peacefully, under the protection of the authorities. It became my way of life when I'd be at work or at home, and out of the blue get a phone call and a greeting like this. "Where are you, darling? We need to go to Midlands. Our people need us." This would be followed by a list of instructions about which minister, which MEC, which medic to call. We all remember, don't we, how Mama stood between protesting students and the heavily armed riot police during what has now become known as June 16. We remember how she would haul and free protesters out of police vans, fearless and determined. As children, my sister and I saw most of her behind bars more than at home. We were at boarding school in Swaziland at ages 5 and 6 years. On the day that we returned home for the holidays, the security branch would ensure that they locked her up that same morning and we returned to an empty house. Now it's interesting how, these experiences become cross-generational, because at some stage when I also became an activist and was involved in underground operations, our home was raided and I was locked up because they found a weapon in my room called a Scorpion submachine gun. I don't know how it got there. I don't know how it got there, but it was there and I was locked up. It was very unusual for me to be locked up and for my mom to stay at home. And she was like saying to me, "Don't worry, darling, I'm going to get you out, I'm going to get the lawyers, you'll be out, within a day or two or a week, don't worry." So there I was sitting very cockily, at Protea police station, thinking like, something's about to happen. And there I saw my mother coming in herself handcuffed. And then I realized, oh my goodness, here I am locked up with my mom, and my kids are now at home alone. So do you see the cycle? Yeah. Our kitchen was not only where we would cook and share meals, it became a war room, a strategic space where plots to overcome the apartheid government were made. When Bongeni Ngema discussed the making of Sarafina with my mom, when I first laid eyes on young revolutionaries, Tsietsi Mashinini and Khotso Siatlulu, where we were tuning to Radio Freedom with a hunger to hear the voices of Duma Nokwe and our leadership in exile. Many of you have had to cross geographical borders to be here. I remember attending a Crossing Borders event about 3 years ago, where stories were shared about the borders that you have had to cross in this new environment. Borders of fear, suspicion, anger, insecurity. My mother would have felt your pain and walked this journey with you. Mama, as a freedom fighter, was incarcerated in apartheid prisons for many years on and off. She was tortured, kept in solitary confinement, banned, kept under house arrest, and continuously harassed and monitored by the security police. They tried to weaken her strength and spirit. And if her perpetrators had succeeded, we would not have remembered the imprisoned Nelson Mandela, never. The apartheid government confined her to a refugee camp. Sorry, should have ordered some gin, brother.
Yeah.
The apartheid government confined her to a refugee camp of oppressions, with all freedoms denied, and she resisted. Mama Winnie's legacy is one of crossing many borders. The borders of imprisonment and oppression, the borders of injustice, the borders of hatred and violation of human rights. As a woman, in the manner that her legacy is overlooked, questioned and tarnished, we all need to help her cross that border of patriarchy. It is ironic when I'm referred to as Madiba's daughter without any mention of my mother. If my dad went to prison when I was 18 months old, who was raised by wolves? It is ironic that in women's dialogues and conferences, where we fight fiercely for our recognition as equals, we elevate Madiba and we bury her legacy. Why are we so afraid of celebrating one of our own? Are we stuck in a patriarchal refugee camp and ready to settle there? Why do we feed into the Madiba saint and Winnie sinner narrative when she has been vindicated of so many allegations? With that in mind, I do encourage you to go and watch the documentary Winnie that exposes how the apartheid police set her up and went out of their way to tarnish her credibility. I would like to thank Crossing Borders for drying our tears, for we cannot carry the burden of this loss alone. People say that time heals, but that is not so. You simply learn to live with the pain. For there are daily reminders in the things that we see, sounds that we hear, and in haunting fragrances. For a long time after my mother's passing, it was very difficult to watch the news, for I see her everywhere in the suffering of my people. And I know that where there is tragedy, grief, violence, hunger, she would have been there. I therefore urge you, in the spirit of Ubuntu, which means I am because we are, and in keeping with Mama Winnie's legacy of unconditional love and unwavering service to others, be the change that you want to see in the world, as the great Mahatma says. Let us all cross our borders of ignorance and create constructive spaces within which to elevate one another in a sisterhood that will be an agency for real change. Thank you. Anecdotes here about the character of my mom, because I was thinking about it as coming here, how I should have wanted to say, like, who all will be there, darling, like, and what are you going to say, and you must tell me the feedback, and she'd be calling me like off the hook wanting to hear what I had experienced. I was just thinking about her, and what a fun person she was, and how much was a true champion of justice. My mother was not about being popular, she was about doing what is right. One example is that there's a dear friend of mine who's amongst you in the audience, who I shall not name, who's quite a troublesome friend. She works with an NGO that keeps us on our toes. So we both happened to be in Cape Town when my mother turned 80. And this friend of mine had been in South Africa protesting with laborers, I shall not name from which sector. And I introduced her to my mom, and I'm busy going about my business, and I overhear this conversation where she's talking about protesting, and my mother saying to her, yes, and you must march on the embassy. So I said, but nah, she says to this friend of mine, don't listen to her, just do what is right. March, you've got my support, I'm with you. So that's the type of person she was. That's how true she was to her spirit. And I cannot thank you enough, Gaba, for this opportunity, Mariano. I wish we could carry on these conversations, though, somehow beyond our just being present under one roof. Whether you create something electronic for us to continue these conversations and dialogues, like you gave your website for the hair and we didn't hear it because we were all laughing, sharing you on and so on. So many things have been said, and a common theme running through all of this is how we have to be change ambassadors. And all of you here are excellencies, each and every one of you. Your child is my child, and each one teach one. Thank you.